morning, guys. I am Ray Lynn, and I am part of the Crossroads community around here. And this is my story. I can remember I was about 12 years old, and I overheard my parents having a conversation about somebody who they knew who had an eating disorder. And they said that the girl would barely eat, and that when she did eat, she would make herself throw up. This is how warped my thinking was at that time. I actually thought to myself, wow, you can do that? You can eat and then get rid of it? Well, this marked the beginning of my 25-year battle with an eating disorder called bulimia. I can remember having negative feelings about my body image even before I entered elementary school. I had two best friends in the neighborhood where I grew up, and I began comparing myself with them. The problem with that is that they were both tiny and petite, and I was just average size. Well, because I was bigger than them, I had determined that I must be fat. Well, as I got a little bit older, I really did start to become chubby. And kids can be really cruel. Their hurtful words and comments really took a toll on my self-esteem. It wasn't only kids who made comments, sometimes even family members would unknowingly say hurtful things. Looking back, I now realize that my body was gearing up for some physical changes. Ladies, you know what I'm talking about. But the sad part is I was 10 years old. I was so young, I didn't even know what it was. My mom had to explain it to me. And unfortunately, my physical changes didn't go unnoticed. It was at this same age of 10 years old that the most traumatic and tragic thing happened in my life. A close relative had molested me. This was somebody who I loved and I trusted. Somebody who was supposed to protect me. And after this, I felt really bad about my body. And I decided I needed to take control. And I tried losing weight, but I wasn't very successful. But then that situation with my parents and me overhearing their conversation, and that's what started it all. My eating disorder, bulimia, followed me all the way through my teens, all the way through my 20s, and most of the way through my 30s. No one knew the lie I was living, not even my husband, and I did everything I could to keep it a secret. Fast forward now to my mid-30s. I started really growing a lot as a Christian woman, and I started reading my Bible every day. And I was amazed at how relevant the Bible was to my everyday life, even though it had been written thousands of years ago. And the more I read my Bible, the closer I grew to God. And eventually I got to this place where I wanted more from my relationship with God. I wanted to go deeper with Him. But for some reason, I just couldn't get there. Then God revealed to me why. I still had this huge secret I was carrying around with my eating disorder, and God was saying, Raylyn, you need to confront this and make some changes in your life. I'll never forget the day that God confronted me about my eating disorder. I was sitting in a Sunday school class, and we were studying the book of John. And we came to a particular passage in John, chapter 5, verses 5 through 6. And here's what it said. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in that condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Well, at that moment, the words leaped off the page. And I felt like Jesus was asking me the same question. Raylyn, do you want to get well? You know, at that moment, I realized I wasn't well. And I was tired of dealing with this. I felt like a prisoner in my own body. And I did want to be free from this. But I had a big problem. My eating disorder had followed me through so much of my life and been a part of my everyday life for so long, I couldn't even comprehend how I could ever be free from it. Well, I didn't know, but God did. And He had already laid the groundwork for my healing. I realized that if I was going to get better, I needed to tell someone about my problem. It needed to be somebody I could trust and somebody who would hold me accountable for my actions. Well, I eventually confided in my closest friend, Karen. And I remember the day, we had spent the whole day together, and I had several opportunities that I could have shared with her. But I was so scared because I was certain and convinced that she would be disgusted with me, and maybe she wouldn't even want anything to do with me anymore. So I kept putting it off and putting it off, but finally I'm taking her home. We pull into her driveway, and she goes to start getting out of the car, and I said, "Hey, can you stay here for a minute? I need to talk to you about something." And she said, "Sure." She got back in the car, and I spilled the ugly truth. And I told her everything. I told her what I'd been dealing with. And the most amazing thing happened, not what I had expected. My friend, Karen, she actually embraced me with compassion. And she said to me, "Raylyn, I believe that God is going to set you free from your eating disorder. But I also believe that when he does, he's going to bring something good out of this." I couldn't imagine how God could bring anything good out of something so disgusting in my life. But I got to tell you, that mere glimmer of hope that she gave me on that day became the driving force in my recovery in the months that followed. My friend had actually told me that she felt like I needed to tell some other people. So I was in a Bible study group with some women, and I finally opened up and shared with them as well. And I believe that God had placed these women in my life to help me get better. They became God's audible voice in his loving arms that I so desperately needed. They prayed for me, they encouraged me, they spoke truth into my life, and they held me accountable. And by no coincidence, we ended up doing a Bible study called Breaking Free. And the whole premise behind this study is how to break free from strongholds in your life through the renewed mind. Romans 12:2. Well, first of all, let me explain what a stronghold is. A stronghold is basically something that it just has a strong hold on you, something that you feel powerless to overcome on your own. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And that's what God began doing through this study. He began showing me that I had believed many lies about myself and about the world that we live in. But he showed me that for every lie that I believed, he actually provided the truth in the Bible. And so I began writing out all these truths that he gave me on index cards, and I would read through them every single day. Well, it didn't happen overnight, but eventually I began trusting God more and more. And eventually I got to the place where I said, "Okay, God, I'm going to believe that you can take this from me." You know what? He was always capable. He was just waiting for me to believe it. Since that day, it's no longer been my burden to carry. I've given it over to God, and I have been free from my eating disorder now for 13 years and counting. After God set me free, I started having some opportunities to share my story. And one of those opportunities was an interview on a Christian radio program. And I had talked about in the radio interview 2 key components in my recovery, that Christian faith-based support of those women and having those biblical truths to overcome all the lies that I had believed. And I had suggested that if anybody was struggling with an eating disorder, they should get involved in a Bible-based support group. Well, after the interview aired, people started calling into the station wanting to know where they could find such a group. Well, to be honest, I just assumed they were out there. But after much research, I realized there was nothing like that in the tri-state. And that became a burden on my heart because I knew how important those 2 things were in my own recovery. And so I started praying about it and asking God what he wanted me to do with this information. And in time, he showed me that that was what he was calling me to do. And so in 2008, Living in Truth Ministries was born. Today, we are a nonprofit organization that helps women in the tri-state break free from worldly lies surrounding food, body image, and self-esteem. And in 2014, Crossroads had heard about what we were doing and came to me and said, "Hey, we want to know what kind of program you're offering. We realize there's the big problem in just the culture in general, and we want to be able to provide something." And in 2016, Eyes Wide Open, the first healing group here at Crossroads began. And if you would like more information about that healing group, I would encourage you to go to crossroads.net or livingintruthministries.com and search for healing groups. And new sessions are going to be starting up at the end of August, and we are going to have a group here at Westside. And also we're going to have a couple at Oakley, one at Florence, and one at Mason. I want to just leave you with some final encouragement. And this is a quote by Ralph Martin that I think really kind of sums up my story. It says, "The footprints we leave behind show clearly where we have been, but they do not dictate where we can now go." Our God is an awesome and amazing God, and he is able to take the ugly and the tragic circumstances of our lives, and he is able to bring beauty from the ashes. Thank you.